There's a reason I think all these founders started in their parents' basements or in universities, right? They had some kind of safety net that like they were still able to keep doing, maybe a normal, approachable, average job that was going to pay the bills while they could try something on the side,
Yeah.
wait till they knew it was going to be successful and then go launch it.
Yeah.
Because if it wasn't successful, they haven't dropped that far. Our culture is shared publicly, that people can understand what to expect and what's important to us.
The Director of Talent Acquisition at Delivery Hero, Lauren Prince, joins me on the podcast this week. Now, for those that don't know, Delivery Hero is one of the biggest names in European tech. And because of that, they've got a very large talent acquisition team that seemingly seems to get high volume results whilst also having a very impressive employer brand. So, how do they do it? That's what we uncover in today's episode. We really dig into their function, their processes, and also the fundamentals of their own employer brand. But first, we talk about Lauren's own journey. She started her career in the West Coast in California before moving to Berlin. She talks about how she rose the ranks on both continents, and she also shares her wisdom to any new people in the TA profession. If you are looking to level up your own TA career or you're in charge of your own TA function, then certainly this is the episode for you. So, without further ado, I'm Alex Bloisey, and this is the Building Our World podcast. We are live and kicking. Lauren Prince, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much. I am doing well. Happy to be here chatting with you. Looking forward to it.
Happy to have you. So, there's going to be tons of TA people listening to this who are desperate to know about what goes on at Delivery Hero, how you seem to hire all these people, why the branding looks so good from the outside, and just what makes the company tick. Because not every company has done it like Delivery Hero. So we are going to get into that. So any TA people listening, we are going to dig into that. But first, Lauren, obviously you are Director of Talent now, but you weren't always. So if we go right back to the beginning of your career, how did things in recruitment start for you? Was it something that you planned to do, or did you fall into it like the majority of us?
I wish I could have a different story, but I fell into it just like everybody else.
Yeah.
I went to university in Southern California and I studied media theory. So a little bit about how media influences society and the way that we tell our stories and the different mediums that we use to explain all of that. And with that degree, I thought I would go into marketing.
Mm.
And I had applied for some internships in marketing and advertising, and I did an internship um, learning a little bit more about that, and then decided that wasn't for me. And I ended up reaching out to an alumnus of my university and trying to find a job when I was graduating. And I had applied to a very different role in this organization, and she called me and she said, "Lauren, have you thought about recruiting?" And I was like,
Mm.
"No, what's that?" A little bit of like, no one ever prepared me for, what this profession is. It was never something you grow up kind of learning about. At least I hadn't. And we started having conversations. And as I started going through the interview process, and they were interviewing me, I was interviewing myself for recruiting a little bit
Yeah.
to say, so the longer the interview process went on, the more I was like, I definitely want this job. But I had applied and not really known
Mm.
what it was or how it worked. And I started actually as a recruiting coordinator. So I was scheduling interviews. I started at Medallia, which is a customer feedback analytics platform. So for those of you who've heard about it, and for those of you who haven't, it really was at the forefront of understanding customer experience and then bringing that into businesses to be able to, as Amazon says, have the customer chair in the boardroom, right? To be
Mm.
able to provide that feedback. And so started as a recruiting coordinator and very quickly, as most startups do. I started when the company was about 210 people. You grow with the company. And
Yeah.
so, and I was based in San Francisco in Silicon Valley. And I then very quickly started doing university recruitment and tech recruitment. And I was playing this dual role or multiple jobs and doing a little bit of everything all at once. And also kind of started doing employer brand as
Mm.
well.
Yeah, I was
Um,
going to mention that. How did you? Because you mentioned you did a lot of around stuff around marketing and storytelling in your
yeah,
education, and maybe I don't know when you first started that wasn't so much of a big thing, but especially now for me as a recruiter, someone building their own recruiting agency, like storytelling, employer branding advice I have to give, like recruitment marketing, they're essential now for a
yeah.
successful TA strategy. I mean, I don't know, was it? It maybe wasn't as blatant back then because talent acquisition's changed so much. But I mean, how much did that expertise come into it?
I mean, it definitely helped, for sure, because I mean, you start at the very beginning of when your job as a recruiter, you get on the phone with someone and you say, "Hi, I'm Lauren. I work at Delivery Hero. Let me tell you about the company," right? And immediately you tell a story.
Mm,
And that pitch or story or however want the narrative, the brand that you're selling, that's the first foray into, what you do as a recruiter, but it's also the first foray into your employer brand. And
yeah.
so that pitch needs to be refined but also flexible to be able to sell an authentic story, right? A good employer brand is not something bunch of buzzwords that everybody wants to hear. It's really articulate of,
Mm,
what is going to be authentic and real to that employer brand, right? It's not just a general brand, it's an employer brand. So
yeah.
you really have to make sure that it is authentic and explaining what that company does and is as well. And so I think I maybe naturally ended up as a good recruiter because of that combination, to be able to tell that story. But also, I mean, from a marketing perspective, you also have to know your audience. You have to know what they want to hear. And when I'm speaking to university students fresh out of college, I'm going to tell, it's not a different story, but I'm going to pick different pieces of the story
Yeah.
that are going to resonate with them differently than when I'm hiring a software engineer, principal software engineer, right? And I'm not telling a different story about the company, but I'm just pulling different levers to explain it in a way that's going to match what I think or what they want to hear. Might even be an explicit question.
Mm. So did you get that kick pretty quickly that most of us do when people sign on that dotted line and you get to tell the hiring manager the good news and all that sort of stuff?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, to be honest, that's what I loved about recruiting that I didn't get with marketing and advertising is
Mm,
it's that really it's a blend for everybody. It's a win-win. If you've done it right, you have met your own targets, but you've given someone a career, right? And you've given them a place they spend often more than 40 hours a week, 8 hours a day with their coworkers and their friends doing a job. And you want them to be happy and have a good livelihood. And I think on the marketing and advertising front, I hope there's no one listening who does that for a living. But I felt like it was a little bit icky. It was maybe only one sided. Like, I want to make sure you buy my product.
yeah.
And with recruiting, it really, at least my philosophy and approach has always been it's two-sided. It's an opportunity for candidates to learn and decide about the company the same way it is for us to say, "Oh, we think this is a good fit for you." And it's that marriage.
Mm, mm. Amazing. Now, this obviously all started in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Um, I'm pretty used to speaking with people who've mostly only ever worked in Europe. So
Hmm.
they obviously come with their own lens and viewpoint on the working world and how companies should operate. Now, I've only ever done European sort of tech recruiting myself. I've never worked with US companies, but I do know about the culture a little bit. I've seen the trends on like Twitter and TikTok of like stories from corporate America where there's like these people working ridiculous hours or missing certain things to make a meeting, staying up all night, all that sort of stuff. Now, Obviously, that's all exaggerated a little bit. But I'd love for you to give an insight into what it's really like in Silicon Valley in that American working culture.
Yeah, I think I'm laughing as you were speaking because it's definitely a little bit of what you see in the media for sure. There's elements, as you mentioned, that are exaggerated, and there's elements that are unique and distinctive and also really amazing. But it is a very different environment, and I worked there and lived there for about 6 or 7 years before I moved to Berlin, and definitely experienced not just the living culture shock, but the work-life balance culture shock as well. If I had to kind of articulate what it's like to work in Silicon Valley, it definitely is a bubble.
Mm.
There, I can't tell you the number of people who are CEOs of their own company who are constantly talking about a million apps, these kinds of things. You're living and breathing inside of your job, but also outside of your job. And then when you meet people, they all have the same hobbies. They all kind of read the same news articles from Medium or Business Insider or whatever it is. They are really do have a finger on the pulse of the next new thing.
Mm.
And the people that you're surrounded with all know those things, right? So you go somewhere else, and I remember the first conversations when I heard about Snapchat or a few of these that now 5, 10 years later are already not even the next big thing anymore, right?
Yeah.
And going through that and working in an environment like that is very different, because I think, especially very different to Berlin. In the US, and I think in a few other cities across Europe and across the world, they're known for certain types of industries or certain types of people, right? And San Francisco and Silicon Valley is definitely one of those where it's known, at least right now. Maybe, it used to be Silicon Valley, right?
Yeah.
And now it's obviously, fiber optic, right? Whatever valley you want to call it, it's the internet of the next big thing.
Yeah.
And Berlin coming and kind of seeing that shift, it's a melting pot in a very different way, right? It's got a little bit of tech, but it's also got a large artist scene. It's got a big music scene. There's also finance here, and a lot of other things that it doesn't have that same there's only one person allowed here kind of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas in Silicon Valley, you don't often meet people that don't work in finance because or in tech because they've been gentrified out, right? So
Yeah.
it definitely has that. In the working experience side of things, I mean, it's all startups or people that just are passionate about trying something new. And so that means when they get in the flow of things, they're working long hours. Often spending tons of time on the commute. I was living in San Francisco and commuting down to Palo Alto. It was an hour and a half each way, right? But I was sitting there working. I'd work a 5, 8, 9, 10 hour day and then commute an hour while still working back, which is a very different life and livelihood,
Mm.
than a lovely 15-minute bike ride to work. And, it's still that same passion and grit, but it's a different life for sure.
Is it that expectation in California or America where you're always on, always responsive, always on call? You can answer emails on holiday. That's the vibe I
Absolutely,
get.
absolutely, and it's expected, and I mean, I think it's changing now with the pandemic for sure, especially in the U.S. But I think that's where Europe has been ahead. It's something you're proud of to work long hours or to be have your identity tied into your career and your job and the amount of effort and time and hours that you put into it.
Mm.
And moving here, that's not the case at all, right?
Yeah.
I can have hour-long conversations with people before we even get to what is my job title and where do I work, right?
Yeah.
And that would never happen in the US. It's always the first question is, hi, what's your name? Where do you work? What do you do?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Berlin is honestly. I remember when I first went, everyone was so nice to me. I wasn't expecting that level of niceties. But one thing, and I know we discussed this before, like, and I come from London and in the UK, where entrepreneurship is like celebrated.
Yeah.
There is a little bit of sort of quiet. That's still that old English quiet tutting of, oh, should you do that? I don't think they're going to make it, kind of thing. In America, it seems completely the opposite. The entrepreneurs are celebrated. Corporate, climbing that corporate ladder is that American dream, and I don't know if that culture has led to these amazing success stories, an amazing amount of wealth created for individuals as well as other people. And I know we talked about this before, that maybe because in America compared to Europe, that there isn't that safety net. So if you make, I mean, this is just my viewpoint anyway. Please feel free to disagree. That if you make it in America, you really do make it. But if you don't and you fall off, it's
Yeah.
very hard to get back on.
It is absolutely. I mean, it's a very different conversation if I steer it towards homelessness and things like that. But absolutely, right? San Francisco also has a huge homelessness problem, and I
Yeah,
mentioned gentrification, right? Like all of these tech and Silicon Valley salaries and ways of living and all of these kinds of things displace people who can't fit there, and that safety net um, definitely doesn't exist as much unless you're part of certain groups like a veteran group or things like that. But we only, I mean, entrepreneurship is still celebrated, but it's only celebrated if you can make it.
yeah,
It doesn't have the same, it doesn't have the same celebration of trial and error. It does a little bit in Silicon Valley, but you need a safety net of money that you've saved up from maybe working at Google first, watch it go IPO, and then you can try something new and learn a little bit and do, right? And I think that's where people are in this bubble of they've already probably succeeded somewhere, and then they have that flexibility and that safety net of their own personal finance to be able to do something else. But yeah, I mean that psychological safety net, but also the barrier of a financial one, right? In Germany, we've got amazing, health insurance, unemployment options, um, even across the rest of Europe, right? Those kinds of social securities are
yeah,
built in to be able to allow you. So entrepreneurship is still celebrated, but um, it's not as far of a drop on your way down. I think in Europe, right? If you
mm,
start a company and then you fail, you're still going to have health insurance at the end of it,
yeah,
right? In the U.S., and it does depend a little bit, I think, on where you live, which state, all of these kinds of things, but you would need that kind of financial safety net or psychological safety net from a partner or family members or there's a reason I think all these founders started in their parents' basements or in universities, right? They had some kind of safety net that like they were still able to keep doing, maybe a normal, approachable, average job that was going to pay the bills while they could try something on the side,
yeah,
wait till they knew it was going to be successful and then go launch it.
yeah,
Because if it wasn't successful, they haven't dropped that far.
yeah. There's still that position of privilege. Um,
Exactly.
Definitely. Um, I do want to, we will definitely get on to talent acquisition as well. I just wanted to ask one more thing because it just reminded me of something. I was speaking to director of a recruitment agency in England, and he met someone who has a US firm.
Mm.
And interesting, they said that there's quite a big cultural difference between the West Coast and East Coast offices. They all went on a full year trip all together, and they were all very separate. The West Coast people didn't sort of, maybe go out as much. They wanted to chill on the beach, doing their sort of a lot more maybe wellness compared to the East Coast. I don't know if you had an opinion on that, but I thought that was quite interesting.
It is. I'm smiling and laughing because my mom is originally from Massachusetts, so East Coast at heart. And I grew up all the way on the West Coast. We grew up in Seattle. And then I lived, like I said, went to school in Southern California and then lived in San Francisco. So I grew up mostly on the East Coast,
Mm.
but I can absolutely tell you there's a difference, not just in dialect and
Yeah.
language, but in speed and pace of life, right? So I remember as a kid, like going shopping with my mom, and I would be chasing after her. And we're just walking from the parking lot to the mall. But she just speed walks, and that's kind of her normal walk. And so everything on the East Coast happens at a faster pace. You're always late for something. You want to make sure, you're on Wall Street, all of those kinds of things, like that speed of life and the urgency, that sense of urgency is always there. Um, on the West Coast, that sense of urgency is still there, but it manifests differently, right? So I think definitely there's a higher quality of life, I think, on the West Coast than the East Coast from that perspective. But
Yeah.
I think especially California, right? That time on the beach, and that speed of it, but it manifests a little bit differently, I think, in terms of building relationships,
Yeah.
and leveraging relationships. So that's, I think, it's still a networking aspect on the West Coast or on the East Coast as well. But absolutely, there's a cultural difference. I mean, the U.S. just I can tell this to a lot of people who kind of forget, but the U.S. is physically just as big as the European Union, right?
Yeah.
So we have 50 states, and the European Union now, sorry, has 26 countries, not 27 anymore.
Sorry about that.
Um, and so it definitely has all of those differences and the cultural differences, the ways of working, that are manifesting itself differently, in cultural dynamics, in work life balance, in how people show up to work, how people communicate. But yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
There are some differences between the Boston, New Yorks of the world to well, and even now like Colorado and San Francisco and Seattle and Oregon are picking up from that perspective.
Mm, fascinating. Yeah, I'd love to explore that more one day. Maybe with my company, hopefully grow out like a US presence or something, or work with US based tech companies. I know they poach a lot of European talent as well.
Yeah.
Coming on to talent, it's quite a good segue actually. Talent acquisition. So you are the director of talent at Delivery Hero,
Yeah.
and obviously you worked your way up in the States, and then you came over and joined Delivery Hero. So how did this move to Berlin happen, and what was your actual first role at Delivery Hero?
Great question. It's ironic I tell this story because I obviously am leading our talent acquisition team, but I didn't go through an official recruitment process to land my job at Delivery Hero. I navigated it through connections. So I was feeling a little bit personally ready to leave San Francisco after about 6 or 7 years in the Valley. There's a sense of I mean, I mentioned there's a little bit of a bubble, and I was feeling like that bubble wasn't giving me the diversity of experiences, the diversity of thought, and the international exposure that I personally wanted for myself and for my career. And so I had kind of always had this goal in the back of my head that I wanted to move to Europe. And I was having drinks with an old coworker of mine who had moved to another job, and she sat down and she said, "Do you still want to go to Europe?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." She goes, "Well, how have you thought about Berlin?" And I said, "No, I definitely haven't. I was looking at roles in Amsterdam and Barcelona and Vienna. Berlin, heard cool things, but
Yeah.
never been, don't know anything about it." And she said, "Well, I have a coworker, an old coworker and friend of mine who just took up a job at Delivery Hero. Do you want me to connect you?" And I said, "Great." And we had a 30-minute chat, and she was kind of walking me through. She was our head of people partners at the time. And she was walking me through the challenges and the experiences that Delivery Hero was going through. And it had mirrored the experience that I just had in the last 4 years at Medallia. A lot of it in terms of high scaling growth in terms of moving to a new people system and rolling that out. They were just about to roll out Workday as an HRIS tool. I had just done that whole experience at Medallia and a few other things that just felt like very, very similar, but also different. So I could almost immediately take the learnings that I just had at Medallia and apply them fresh and with a new spin based on, doing things that I know worked well and exploring things that didn't at Delivery Hero. And so that was really exciting to me. And I ended up having a few further conversations with someone who would be my new boss and then a few other people. And I think I had three conversations. Then I started telling my family about Delivery Hero, and they're like, "We've never heard of it," because we don't operate in the U.S.
No,
And we
yeah.
don't plan to. And so I was about to, shake up my whole life, move halfway across the world for a company that nobody had ever heard of, at least in my bubble.
Yeah.
But that was also kind of what I wanted. I wanted to try something new. And so I ended up having a few conversations, and um, I was offered a job as originally as senior manager for what we called core people operations at the time, which who knows what that means. When I arrived, it was essentially people operations. It was our HR operations team. So it
Yeah.
was a team of about 5 people that were responsible for supporting all of our new heroes who had just relocated like me with a visa process, a relocation process, support with a contract, actually everything after the recruiting process. So signed offer, handed over to my team at the time, core people operations. And over the last 3 years, I really was growing out that team from 5 people to 40 people. And in April of this past year, I moved over we renamed that team People Solutions, which was covering onboarding, global mobility, what we called hero support, and some kind of process excellence pieces. And in April of this year, I stepped in to lead our global talent acquisition team.
Amazing. So, how many talent acquisition people, are you in charge of or have in the team?
The number changes every day, but right now we're at 96.
Wow.
Yeah.
Where do I?
We did hit 100 a few months back. But yeah, we're at 96 today.
Wow. Well, where do I even begin with that? So, I suppose let's try and reverse engineer. So, as someone who's obviously top of that TA pile, so you obviously get your headcounts, and you
Yeah.
get you kind of know the areas of the business that need to grow. Um, and how do you sort of obviously need to hire all these people? So how do you work back from that? And even knowing how many people you need, because in my experience, sometimes hiring managers don't actually know how many people they need.
Yeah.
So yeah, how does this headcount get sorted out? And then what's the thought process at the start when you're looking to fill that?
It's a great question, and I think that's always the challenge that we face. We talk a lot about hiring targets and meeting our headcount goals, but
Yeah,
I think often we miss the conversation of like who sets those targets and how did we get there. And that's always a combination of understanding the business needs, right? So often it's where we get to play. I think as talent acquisition professionals, we often have multiple hats that we wear, and one of the really important hats is a talent advisory hat, where we get to understand, okay, what kind of a business are you solving for, and what do you kind of skills do you need, what kind of roles, how quickly are you planning to grow that team, that business, that organization, and then we get to kind of advise and support the business to say, okay, well, it's a little bit easier when it's a smaller team. You can say, okay, if you're trying to build a sales function, you need to start with 1, 2, 5 people. How long is a sales cycle, right? Okay, how long? So you kind of reverse
yeah,
engineer the business need itself and advise them on what is the right thing. Like I said, it's usually a little bit easier when you're talking team by team. When it's like, okay, well, we grow from 100 to 1,000. It's a little bit hard to know exactly where those areas of the business are, exactly what level they will be at, and that depends a little bit on the business maturity. But you try to look towards, okay, what do we need to achieve? Um, what kind of skills and team do we need to be able to achieve that? And then where do we expect to find operational efficiencies within the headcount? And where do we need support from third parties?
Mm.
A very high level, simplistic approach to
Yeah,
headcount planning. But that's kind of where we start.
yeah. Because even working out how many positions per recruiter in your team, how many they could fill, say, a year.
Yeah.
I mean, how long's a piece of string? Because it completely depends. I mean, if you're looking at, say, staff principal engineers, obviously very
Hmm.
hard to find and hire. So, is there any process that you try and do to? Do you kind of give a target to your talent team for hires per year or quarter?
We don't necessarily give targets from that perspective, but I generally know what expectations would be, right?
Okay.
So on an average, I know roughly how many, hires per month per recruiter, but there's always a little bit of nuance based
Yeah.
on the complexity of the role, based on the department that we're in, based on the market, trends that are happening, and based on also the positioning and the storyline of the business itself, right?
Mm.
So there's definitely a lot of levers to play with or block puzzle pieces to kind of fit together. But there's a lot of benchmarks out there to understand that as well, right? So you can take a look at what is an average, number of hires per recruiter, but it really depends on, like I said, the seniority of the recruiter, the complexity of the role. In general, we know, obviously more senior talent, executive talent takes a lot longer, needs to be
Yeah.
a lot more white glove, and you're going to get a lot lower output. But the quality also is going to be super high. And there's always a Venn diagram of like speed, and quality that come together in this too, right? In theory, we could hire, 10 engineers per recruiter per month. It would be crazy, and it's not out of the question. I definitely have recruiters that do that.
Yep.
But usually it's, an open role, software level, like junior position, or you often sometimes you can sacrifice quality, right? You're
Yep.
bringing in a lot of good people, but are they going to stay for 1, 2, 5 years? Are they aligned to your culture and your business values? Are they going to be successful here, right? And that's where you have that, you kind of play around with it. So that's, doesn't really, probably people listening want to hear like this is the benchmark for number of
Yeah.
recruiters per month. But in general, we kind of have I know for certain teams, like for tech and product, and for certain levels within my team, what I would expect in terms of the seniority of roles they'd be able to hire for, the number of roles. But you also
Mm.
it depends a little bit also on the full recruiting funnel, right? If all offers that go out are accepted, if we have, which is like a magic thing that happens, right? If you get 100% offer acceptance, you can probably hire a lot more. But the reality is we don't, no one right now, I think, has 100% offer
No.
acceptance, right? So it depends how lucky you get also from that perspective. And luck is not the only thing that has to do with
Yeah.
it. But yeah, it's an art and a science, I think.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned about obviously the values and the culture. What I think Delivery Hero is brilliant at is
Mm,
communicating their values and culture in their employer branding. And it probably maybe comes back to when we first started talking about the marketing and storytelling.
yeah,
Um, all the work that your talent team does is made so much easier by a strong employer brand. It's something that can work massively for you, but if you don't work on it, it can work really against you as well. Believe me, over the years, I've picked up some clients that never really thought about that. And in the end, they obviously couldn't attract the talent, but the talent they managed to get in didn't have the soft skills and value skills. And these obviously end up being the people who interview future candidates, and a
yeah.
candidate gets the impression from the interviewer. So I think it's a huge thing to get right, and I think Delivery Hero do a great job on that. So I wonder if you could shed some light on the employer branding, say, strategy, but
Mhm.
maybe the level of importance put on it within the business?
Yeah, it's a fabulous question, and there's a lot of elements to it as well. And thank you for saying that we do it right, because we also still feel like we've got a long way to go. But I think one of the things that we are actively deliberate about, and I think that's something that maybe
Mm.
why you're saying it's so good, is we're actively deliberate about making sure that our culture is shared publicly, that people can understand what to expect and what's important to us. And I think the other important element of employer brand is that what you do share is the reality,
Yeah,
right? And I
so
think
true.
I cannot tell you the number of times people I've had walk in the door or meet with me and say, you told me you're a diverse company, and then I get here and it's true. Or,
Yeah.
you told me to expect that we are heroes because we care and we'll always aim higher, but we care a lot more about speed versus perfection. And then I got here and I realized that that's true. And the employer brand only works if what you're actually sharing becomes the reality. Otherwise, as you said, it works against you, where you've said an aspirational goal for what you want your culture to be like, or what you want your brand to be, and then it backfires. So we're deliberate about it, but we also want to be authentic about it. And so we've put together some key elements of kind of foundational aspects. What is our tone of voice when we share out our employer brand? How do we make sure that tone of voice is aligned to our visual identity? And how do we have kind of key pillars or key messages that we want to be sharing out on a regular basis about who we are? And then how do we find stories within the business that reflect that? So it's definitely not, it's also an art and a science, but it's really about making sure that what's happening inside the business is shared outward
Mm.
in a true and authentic way. And I mean, Nicholas, our CEO, will say this too. Also, when we make mistakes, we will share those too, right?
Yep.
So that's authentic to who we are, and also what we try to do when we share things out. So that's, I would say, some of the foundational elements of what we have. That we have some key themes and key messages, and a tone of voice that surrounds that feels
Yeah.
real for us.
Yeah. So start by building a company with a good culture, a diverse culture, and then once you've got that, then put it in the shop window to
Yeah.
to the world. It's so true. And when you look at for anyone listening, when you look at Delivery Hero stuff, it does seem real. It does seem authentic, and I suppose it seems that because it is. And I do think sometimes um, you can definitely tell with companies, and all it takes is for the secret to get out with a couple of companies, especially in European tech. If you're a big tech company, everyone talks,
Yes. Everyone
and
talks.
yeah, and yeah, I think the criticisms of Delivery Hero that maybe people say is something that people at Delivery Hero would say themselves,
Yeah.
and I think that's super important. But yeah, I know the stuff you've done. I was just looking at your YouTube. You do like a hero minute, where you interview someone for a minute and put it on your YouTube channel. The
Hmm.
diversity series as well, and yeah, it just seems slick and it does seem real. I mean,
Thank
how
you.
with this employer brand, and I know you say you want to improve, how much do you feel that working for you when you're doing the day
Mhm.
to day recruiting? I suppose it's so normal to you now, but do you feel that at all?
In terms of how we feel it working for us, I think absolutely. I think we're getting candidates that feel aligned to our values. So at the top of the funnel, I think people know, and I mean, I said at the beginning, my philosophy on recruiting is, it's people wanting to work at a company,
Yeah,
and also you want them to work for you, right? And so I think we are seeing a quality of person and a quality of candidate that feels in line with our values. And so I can definitely see that working for us, by sharing, our three values. We're all heroes because we care, we always aim higher, and we deliver solutions. Like, you can see that in the candidates we interview and the people that we meet, because we also know that that's what's going to make someone successful here. And so I think that that's one way I've seen it work really well for us. Um, but yeah, I think another way is people really do, when they've heard about us, or they've often, engaged with our platform. Delivery Hero itself, if for those of you who don't know, is not a consumer brand in and of itself, right? So usually people will engage with us through our consumer brand. So they'll hear of us by working or ordering from Yemek Sepeti in Turkey, or Petit Dosia in Latin America, or Food Panda. And so then they come to us by way of that, and know a little bit about who we are and what we do. And I would say some of the other pieces for us is, I mean, we explain and talk about ourselves at Delivery Hero as a diverse and truly international organization. And we see that in the candidates that come through as well, right?
Yep.
I mean, we talk about this publicly a lot, but we have currently over 107 nationalities just in our Berlin office, right? Which is something we're incredibly proud of, but it comes really easily and naturally to us just because people see that and they apply and they want to work at international organization. And that's a really unique selling point for us that's authentic, but then also is one of those self-fulfilling prophecies.
Mm. Absolutely. But what advice would you give to maybe a talent team who
Mm.
don't have the best sort of employer brand, or maybe like a startup or like a founding team or something? Because I mean, the pushback you always get is, yeah, but that's going to take ages to see results from that. Um, why don't we just put more time into sourcing candidates, getting people in the funnel, and eventually we'll hit our head count? Um, Now, the more experience I get and the more companies I work with, I realize the importance of employer branding and how it makes things easier. But
Yeah.
what advice would you give to maybe a talent team or a young startup that want to start putting their employer branding in the right direction?
It's a good question. I think there are a lot of really quick and even free wins that you can do when it comes to employer brand, right? I think a lot of people say, oh, I need to spend like marketing dollars, marketing euros, millions to really have a good employer brand. And there's actually a lot you can do that's free, right? It's about really confirming what is your pitch, what is the story you want to tell candidates, right? Every recruiter call that you have articulated that, right? That's just knowing your why as an organization, and sharing that out to the world. It's sharing it in your job descriptions, really making sure that your job descriptions have a story about your company, that showcase the benefits that you offer, whatever it is that you want people to know about you. That's it. Literally, you have to put a job description out there for people to apply anyway. So make that authentic. Um, I think those are two really, really quick wins that just, here's my pitch. And just a few philosophical principles that you might have as a business about your values that you can showcase or explain in your recruiting process. So it's really not, you don't have to over engineer or over
Yeah.
architect or throw a bunch of money at employer branding. You can, right? And that can help, but there's a lot of things you can do for free.
Yeah, and I think it's probably more important to plant those real authentic seeds first,
Yeah,
and then once you have that, maybe put some money into it. Um,
exactly.
but you yourself, obviously, you're in charge of all this. Well, I say in charge, but you're sort of the director now. Was that something you always wanted to do? Your career path in the US and in Berlin, I'd say, is pretty fast trajectory,
Yeah.
and you've done a lot. So why do you think that's the case? Is that to do with something like work ethic, or have you like nature or nurture?
It's a fabulous question. I ask myself that a lot as well, but I think I fell into a profession that really matches my skills and my passions. And that kind of happened for me naturally. And it's always, there's ebbs and flows, and there's days where it's hard and I question it and all of these kinds of things. But I think ultimately, yeah, I also learned what wasn't going to work for me. And I found, I would say that the overall discipline of people and culture that feels right for me. I think sometimes, I left recruiting for a reason, right? I stopped doing that and moved into HR operations and onboarding and a few other pieces and then came back to it. So I think the overall, I guess, HR or people and culture function has really been the right place for me to be able to leverage my strengths. One of which I think is empathy and truly kind of understanding, supporting, and caring the people around me. But I also have a knack for kind of looking at finding efficiencies and
Mm,
seeing things improve. And so the operational pieces of, how to do more with less, or how to, how to be able to support personalization at scale, right? That was a lot of conversations that we had about how we were going to scale onboarding. How do you scale recruiting, right? When you do those kinds of things, I think I just kind of ended up like those were the pieces that I really love doing. They get me really excited. And being able to continue to keep that human element felt like, I don't know, I ended up in the right place for where my strengths and passions are.
yeah.
And I think some people it takes a little bit longer to figure that out. I definitely had a few bouts of, my dad wanted me to go into dentistry. I tried marketing. There were a few whole avenues that I tried out first. But that's where it comes down to that you've
Mm,
aligned kind of your own personal goals, passions, and strengths with a profession.
mm. Yeah, I mean, especially in talent acquisition, what I think what's great about it is there's so much you can do with it,
Yeah.
especially as you go sort of higher up and it gets a bit more operational. One of the best analogies, I had a tea expert, Robert, on the podcast from Berlin, and he said sort of viewing the talent acquisition function as a business within itself. So,
Yeah.
your employer branding is your marketing, your operations, your sales funnel, finding efficiencies, making sure the spend isn't too high, and
Hmm.
especially at a company like Delivery Hero, where the talent team in itself is as big as most companies.
Exactly.
you
Definitely
are
a startup. Yeah.
you are that kind of startup founder that needs to deliver results in an efficient way, building a brand, motivating your team. You have all those same headaches.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's interesting that you say that because we talk about that a lot. And I think that's where I think recruiters sometimes get pigeonholed into one thing.
Yeah,
But I would even argue like it's even more than just that. We're also often the face of the business, the face of our employer brand. Um, and we often are kind of the front for actually a holistic people and culture view. I think a lot of times business will say to me, like, this feels like a recruiting problem. And I'm like, it might be, but also this might be a total rewards challenge or a market problem or, attrition related, like retention related. And so we're often the face of saying, okay, this is maybe the mole that jumped out of the box, but actually it's more holistic than that. And I think that's also the fun part of talent acquisition is that you actually get to do a little bit of everything. You can be, you are that whole business in and of
yeah.
itself, and you're also almost the whole that heart of the people and culture team as well.
Yeah, because you can really get yourself into all corners of the company, and
Hmm.
you work with different managers. Maybe one's slower than the other, or one's a harsh interviewer, or something like that, and you can find this stuff out pretty quickly.
Yeah,
It's
but there absolutely are pieces of talent acquisition for everybody, right?
mm,
And there's also parts that you might not be as interested in, right? You can be a full cycle recruiter, coordinator, sourcer, and recruiter, and you can also only be one of those pieces. As you said, you can look at data and navigate a sales pipeline or a recruitment funnel. And know how to tweak and where to go. You can partner with the business and actually be their talent advisor and their first point of contact in terms of how they want to build their organization. You're also often their sometimes their business partner. Someone just left or resigned and you need to fill that gap. And so you really get to know your business. And I think that's also why I loved tech recruiting because I almost got to explore a whole new function
Mm.
And I mean, I wasn't a software engineer, but at the time I felt like I was. I could tell you the different stacks, the different languages, how, the value that it was creating for the business. And it just gives you a whole new flavor of it's more than just recruitment for sure.
Absolutely. You mentioned their data. Um,
Yeah.
Data always comes up a lot in these chats. So I'm the typical. I love recruitment because of the people side of things, the fast pace. I like sort of building businesses and client bases and selling. I hate data. I learn to like it now because I know the value in it, but pulling out data on a spreadsheet, well, it's just not me. What about yourself? Have you learned to love it, or is that something you've always been interested in?
I learned to love it, but um, I definitely learned to love it. As a kid, I used to hate math.
Mm,
So I think numbers and data was always really hard for me because as a people person, I believe in the gray and numbers felt like black and white.
yeah,
Um,
same.
but I definitely think at Medallia, where we were starting to use data to understand customer sentiment and experience, it made me understand that data is a starting point for a story and it's not black and white, but it helps you understand what's going on. It gives you a baseline, and you can say, okay, if I have five people coming to me and each of them are telling me a problem, if I look at the data, I can say, okay, this problem feels like is probably, a significantly higher portion of the issues that we're facing, right? Whereas if I have five people, I might be treating their problems equally. But I can look
Mm,
at the data and say, okay, this is the top of the funnel. This is, an offer rejection challenge. This is a salary challenge. This is whatever. How many people is this impacting? What is the, challenge this is facing to the business? And then I can say, okay, we have five challenges to solve for, but let's tackle this one first because it's hitting, the larger portion of the population. Or let's tackle this one first because it's the top of the funnel and we really need, we're solving for that. So
mm.
it's always a starting point, and that's where, I mean, you asked me, do I give my team targets? Like, we have headcount goals, but I never want them to feel like they're fully pressured and accountable only to deliver hire, because it's also not just about hiring them, it's about the quality of the hire
Yeah,
once they're here as well. And you can often get trapped in that. And so for me, I learned, I think the customer, and now I talk to my team a lot about candidate experience, employee experience, like that is the most important part. And especially when you talk about a recruitment funnel, 98% of the people we talk to will not get a job at Delivery Hero, right? And
yeah.
that candidate experience for them is just as important, if not more important, than the people we hire, because they're going to go around and keep talking about Delivery Hero afterwards.
Yeah.
And they're brand ambassadors positively or negatively based on that
Mm,
experience. And so
mm.
data can help us understand that a little bit more.
Absolutely. What tools do you use to pull out data on the day to day? Is there any like software or anything that you found that's really helped that maybe could help others?
Absolutely. So we use, well, yeah, it wouldn't be a good Medallia alumni if I didn't tell you that Medallia also does employee experience and candidate experience surveys. But at Delivery Hero, we use a company called Talent Hub to run our candidate experience surveys. And we measure that on our careers site about the application process, but also all the way through the recruiting experience, offer exception, offer rejection, as well as once they've been onboarded as well. So that's the tool that we use, and it gives us an understanding, but they also benchmark to other industries, so we know a little bit about how our candidate experience stacks up to other companies as well.
Mm,
And there are a
yeah.
variety of softwares out there.
Yeah, I know, but that's the thing. When we talk about data, I mean, a lot of people sometimes will like hear data and they need to pull something out. They need to get numbers, and you don't want to use data for data's sake. It's got to have a reason. And there's a million and one tools, software tools, and people emailing you from different software companies. But
Exactly. We do really love Talent Hub.
yeah,
I think they're for us because not just of the data that they provide and share about our customers or our candidates, but also the partnership that we have with them. They come talk to us on a quarterly basis and let us know how we're doing. They're actually partners to us in employer brand. They'll tell us, hey, you should tweak these two things in your job description. So they've been kind of a holistic um, supporter for us, as opposed to just providing the data. And I think that's where, like I said, I look at data as a starting point for a story. And I think if you can try to find software systems vendors that also have that similar approach to you, like Talent Hub has been for us, then that's really also a good partnership. Because there's, as you said, there's a million recruitment agencies, there's a million recruiting platforms, and it can, I think, get to be overwhelming
Oh
sometimes.
yeah.
And I know you didn't ask me for advice, but maybe you did. I think that's another piece of advice I would share with talent acquisition teams and professionals is, um, find the vendors that also feel aligned to your culture.
Yep. Very, very important. Um, I get a lot of that actually when I'm pitching to clients. So, um, what we obviously we have our values, and then they say their values, and they say, well, how would you marry that up? How would you sell our company? Do you even understand what our company is going to be like?
Yes.
Things that stuff. So it's something that a lot of companies um, worry about. So when I first started in recruitment, we get asked things about the diversity of our talent pool and our talent community, and we were unprepared. And
Mm,
obviously now we've worked to try and make our talent community as diverse as possible, because that's what companies want, and that's how companies should be. But it's a very interesting topic. But before we finish, I wanted to get to know a bit about the future for yourself. So in your career, you've done a
mm.
lot in a pretty short space of time, to be honest. So how do you map out the next few years of your career, and when you look back, when it's all over, what would you have liked to have achieved?
Oh, that's a great question, and a hard one. I think, um, yeah, I mean, you're right. I've grown a lot, and it continued to evolve as my career has grown, as I've moved across the world. But also the organizations that I've been a part of, I've gotten to grow personally and professionally with them. And I think that's something I've really enjoyed, and definitely want to continue. I think for me, definitely the people and culture space is a place where I feel comfortable and at home. And I'd love to be able to continue to provide a comfortable, and supportive environment for people when they're working, right? So, regardless of which organization that takes me to, I think, it's been amazing, even over the last 10 years, to see how the HR function has shifted and evolved. And I just want to continue to be a part of that journey because our people are humans, and they deserve the respect and support from their businesses. And I think that's also something that we've realized more now after the pandemic. The expectations on employers has gotten to be more. They're supposed to support mental well-being, physical well-being, financial well-being, like all of these aspects that it used to just be like a place where you would do your job and leave, right?
Yep.
And it comes with a lot of responsibility, but it also feels like the right level of accountability and responsibility. And so, um, I think that's something that as I've grown and evolved in a variety of different aspects of my career, that I've just realized it's an amazing space to be a part of and to support. And those one-on-one conversations, if I can turn around someone's day, or, you know, really have a conversation with someone who might be down or struggling or developing people, like, I think especially the people manager aspect of my career has been super rewarding to be able to
Mm,
support and develop, um, the future generation, to feel like they have the confidence in themselves and their own skills to continue to grow.
mm.
So I don't know exactly what the future has in store for me. To be honest, I don't make 2 5-year plans anymore. But I would say, it's really important to me to work at an organization that feels aligned with my own personal values, and that wherever I go in the future, that's something I will continue to evaluate.
So for the eagle-eyed amongst you on YouTube, we're in different outfits because we lost the last bit of the recording. So we've had to do it again, but because Lauren's advice was so valuable, we needed to get this one on air. So again, Lauren, I wanted to end the show just by asking what your advice would be to someone who's just starting out in talent acquisition or early on in their career.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think thinking about my younger self and what advice I would have wanted, as well as what's important to kind of make sure that you have as you're starting out in your career and in talent acquisition, is really building strong relationships with your business partners, with the partners that you're going to build and hire for their teams. I think that's one of the most crucial things that you can do as you're starting out, is to really understand who you're supporting, what are the challenges that they're facing, and really be that business partner to them. Whether it's in the way that you advocate for your candidates or the way that you give feedback, understanding also the connections that you're able to make with the candidates themselves will be stronger when you are able to understand what your business needs, and build that partnership with them. So
Mm,
I think that's one of the key things to really nail down early on, is to build those partnerships and those relationships. And the best recruiters I know to this day are the ones that have figured that out, in the best possible way.
absolutely. Yeah, that's one thing when I first started out in recruitment that really stuck with me was to build rapport, to build relationships with people, because you never know when you're going to need to call on that rapport or relationship to get a favor or get something over the line or to push something. Um, and yeah, it's a lot easier to push someone you sort of get along with if you need to get something done, which
Yeah,
happens
but
a
but
lot.
it's also about the trust, right? I
Mm,
think making sure that you're able to have that trust with your hiring teams, because you also never know if you have to make a tough call,
mm,
or if you've got, a really strong candidate, but they don't match all of the criteria, or you need to kind of um, put a little bit of, a mirror up to the team member and say there's a little bit of bias at work here, right? Having a lot of that positive intent and that trust, because there are a lot of difficult conversations that you will have to have, whether it's with a candidate or a hiring manager or whatever. And having that level of trust is really, really crucial. But I also think as we think about the next generation of recruiting overall, it's really about recruiting business partners, right?
mm,
And knowing that we're a support function, but we're not actually. We in order to really do our job and bring in the next level of people, and keep the quality, talent bar high, we really need to understand what the business is working on and the challenges that they're facing, so that we can do our job well, but also, um, that's what the next level of recruitment looks like. So that level of trust is really crucial.
absolutely. Well, fantastic. And what a way to end the show again. But thank you.
Hopefully for the last time.
Yeah, we wouldn't have lost this recording. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story, your journey, and your wisdom. I know there's tons of people in talent acquisition that want to know how others are doing it, how other really successful companies are executing, and I'm sure they can take a lot of the knowledge from today into their own work. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure talking with you, and hopefully the insights and wisdoms are valuable to the next generation of talent acquisition professionals as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to the Building Our World podcast. Every view, stream, and download is massively appreciated. If you're new here, then please go back through the catalogue. There's some great gems from some of the brightest and the best in Berlin tech. And if you really like what you hear, then please do hit that follow and subscribe button. That's it for now. But until next time, goodbye.